Hi, it's r.w.forder again. George William Foote. 11th of January 1850 to the 17th of October 1915, and his journal, The Freethinker. George William Foote was born in Plymouth, the son of a customs officer who died when he was 4. As a youngster, he had an Anglican upbringing. In 1891, in The Freethinker, he provided a little information about his early life when he wrote this. While in my native town of Plymouth, I had read and thought for myself, and had gradually passed through the various stages of skepticism until I was dissatisfied even with advanced Unitarianism. But I could not find any literature in advance of this position, and there was no one to whom I could inquire. Secularism and atheism I had never heard of in any definite way, although I remember when a little boy having an atheist pointed out to me in the street. Naturally, I regarded him as a terrible monster. In 1876, Foote moved to London and worked in a West End library. Poetry was a great love. He admired Shakespeare, Byron, Browning, and Shelley. He thought highly of George Meredith, whom he knew. His interest in the arts was wide, including Titian and Turner, Beethoven and Wagner. In short, Foote was a highly cultured man, although ironically, he is best remembered, if remembered at all, for his scurrilous, satirical, and in some people's opinion, vulgar freethinker. Foote married twice. His first wife, Henrietta Marianne Hyman, was a gifted musician and linguist, but died a few months after their marriage in 1877. We know little of his second wife, not even her name. There were no children. As soon as he arrived in London, he began attending freethought meetings and lectures and met Charles Bradlaugh. He started a secular Sunday school at the Hall of Science and formed a Young Men's Secular Association. In 1870, he began contributing to the National Reformer, and in 1873 was secretary of the London Republican Club and National Republican League. At first, Foote seemed to be following in Bradlaugh's footsteps. Like Bradlaugh, he was an impressive platform orator. However, soon a rivalry between them began to develop. Foote objected to what he regarded as Bradlaugh's autocratic behaviour within the NSS. In 1876, he approached G.J. Holyoake, and together they founded the Secularist, which, in direct opposition to Bradlaugh's position, eschewed theological attacks. At the NSS conference that year, Foote was nominated for a vice presidency, but was defeated when Bradlaugh and Besant threatened to resign if he was elected. This may well have focused Foote's thoughts, because Holyoake and Foote then dissolved their partnership. The Knowlton pamphlet case caused a further major rupture between Besant and Bradlaugh, on one hand, and Foote on the other. Foote saw no necessary connection between birth control and secularism. He was expelled from the NSS for his criticism of the Society's policies and attacks on Bradlaugh's imperiousness. He then joined with Charles Watts in the British Secular Union, a rival and alternative to the NSS. However, despite this past history, Bradlaugh's struggle to enter Parliament resolved all differences. Foote was appalled by the treatment Bradlaugh received. This led to a fundamental change in the tone and style of his writing. May 1881, the first issue of Foote's Freethinker appeared with Bradlaugh's support. Foote had become a militant. The Freethinker trumpeted Foote's militant intention in the first paragraph of the first number. The Freethinker is an anti-Christian organ and must therefore be chiefly aggressive. It will wage relentless war against superstition in general and against Christian superstition in particular. It will do its best to employ the resources of science, scholarship, philosophy, and ethics against the Bible as divine revelation. And it will not scruple to employ for the same purpose any weapons of ridicule or sarcasm that may be borrowed from the armoury of common sense. That is precisely what he did. Foote always wrote the Freethinker's leading article, though his assistant, Joseph Mazzini Wheeler, contributed much content too. The paper was an instant success, and by the fifth issue had become weekly rather than monthly. From the third issue, in July 1881, cartoons began to appear. By criticising religion with ridicule and sarcasm, Foote was defying the taboo that religious views should be treated with respect and reverence. He was seeking to establish that religion is a social phenomenon open to the same range of comment as all other aspects of human behaviour. He knew he was inviting prosecution. And in fact, in March 1882, he wrote, quote, "No prosecution yet. The Freethinker still goes on blaspheming. Our souls are in arms and ready for the fray, but the enemy won't come on." Well, that changed in May, with prosecutions against Foote as editor, W.J. Ramsay as manager, and William Kemp as printer. The main mover was Sir Henry Tyler MP. Primary motive was to get Bradlaugh. As the law stood, anybody convicted of blasphemy was barred from the House of Commons. However, Bradlaugh managed to escape the net by proving that he was not the proprietor of the newspaper, despite the first few issues having been published from 28 Stonecutter Street. Foote welcomed the fight. I quote, "Let them do their worst. They will not break our spirit nor extinguish our case. Let the Christian mob clamour as loudly as they can. Crucify him! Crucify him! They will not daunt us." The first trial was conducted before Lord Justice North, a Catholic widely regarded by freethinkers as a bigot. The prosecution was brought against the Christmas number of 1882, whose cartoons had caused outrage amongst the pious. One of the main tactics was to lampoon the Bible statements by presenting them in pictorial form. Foote conducted his own defence, which concluded with a 3-hour address interrupted by waves of applause from supporters. The jury failed to agree. A retrial was ordered, but in the meantime, Foote and his colleagues were refused bail. The second trial also took place before North, and he remained hostile. In his final statement to the jury, Foote asked, I quote, "To allow us to go away from here free men, and so make it impossible that there ever again should be a prosecution for blasphemy, and have your names inscribed in history as the last jury that decided forever that great and grand principle of liberty, which is broader than all the skies, the principle of the equal right and liberty of every man." All to no avail. The three defendants were convicted. Following a hostile summing up, North sentenced Foote to 12 months, Ramsay 9, and Kemp 3 months. Foote responded by turning to the judge and congratulating him. "I thank you. The sentence is worthy of your creed." There was widespread shock at the sentences, with appeals and petitions being sent to the Home Secretary, but to no avail. Meanwhile, the Freethinker editorship was taken over by Edward Aveling on a temporary basis. Wheeler, Foote's most obvious deputy, was prone to nervous breakdowns. On the 24th and 25th of April, Foote and Ramsay were tried again, this time before Lord Justice Coleridge, on charges relating to the Freethinker of the 28th of May 1882. In particular, there was an article, "What Shall I Do to the Damned?" and a cartoon showing an old gentleman in the gloom holding a match to light his pipe, with the title "Divine Illumination." Coleridge treated the defendants with consideration and courtesy. In contrast to North, he allowed Foote to quote from respectable agnostics, such as Thomas Henry Huxley, as he pleaded that there was, quote, "injustice in the writer of the penny papers carrying off as a scapegoat into the wilderness of Holloway jail the sins of all cultured agnostics of the day." Again, the jury failed to reach a verdict, and though a retrial was expected, it never occurred. Conditions in Holloway were dire, far worse than anything suffered by Carlyle. At first, Foote was held in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day and allowed only the Bible as reading matter. He had to sleep on a plank bed. W.J. Ramsay produced a pamphlet describing conditions which included this illustration on the front cover. Foote was released from Holloway on the 25th of February 1884. Outside, a large crowd assembled. Foote was taken to the Old Street Hall of Science, where a special celebration breakfast took place. He immediately resumed editorship of Freethinker, and the cartoons, suspended during his imprisonment, returned. He was in great demand as a lecturer throughout the country, and generally spoke under the title How I Fell Among Thieves. Foote had achieved martyrdom. On the 16th of February, 1889, a special NSS conference was called. An ailing Charles Bradlaugh had decided to resign as president and proposed Foote as his successor. When the moment came, he presented a small hammer or gavel to Foote and said this: "I tender the only emblem of office we have. This hammer, presented to us by the widow of James Watson, was used in the old rotunda, days when such freedom as we now enjoy were impossible. Carlyle often used it. I give it to you joyfully, Foote, and trust you will hand it to your successor." I'm delighted to say this gavel is still in the possession of the National Secular Society. The National Reformer did not survive long after Bradlaugh's death, and with this, the Freethinker became the voice of the NSS. He continued in that capacity for over a century, although it no longer fulfills that role because, while the journal is avowedly atheist, the NSS no longer regards the terms atheism and secularism as synonymous. The NSS itself changed under Foote and became almost exclusively an atheist organisation. Satire and biblical criticism were the order of the day, coupled with Foote's biting exposure of the absurdities of religion and the religious. From now on, it was less concerned with campaigns for political, social and economic reform, though Foote himself remained an ardent Republican, despite his earlier stance, an advocate of birth control. In his last years, Foote wrote despairingly of the approach of war, focused on what he saw as the culpability of the religious. Foote died on the 17th of October 1915, and the presidency of the NSS and editorship of the Freethinker passed to Chapman Cohen, who was to become the NSS's longest serving president, holding the office for 34 years. Some concluding comments. Under Foote, the NSS evolved from being a quite broadly based political campaigning organisation into a much narrower, free-thinking, atheist pressure group. This may well have been inevitable, but the NSS became divorced from wider radical campaigns, and in doing so, lost followers. Also, Foote's own approach to secularism revolved around his flair for biting satire. As such, he was applauded by some, but alienated others. The religious, meanwhile, learned a highly effective response. They simply ignored him. Nevertheless, he retained a loyal base in the NSS and a loyal Freethinker readership, which meant the organisation survived what could have been mortal blows with the death of Bradlaugh and the defection of Annie Besant. Further reading. Just one suggestion, because There are no biographies of Foote, although Jim Herrick wrote an excellent short history of the Freethinker, which includes substantial biographical details. Thank you for listening. If you want to contact me about this or any other aspect of secularist and NSS history, my email address is r.w.forder@btinternet.com.